Kia ora, hello and welcome. This week we're going to get involved in one of the hottest debates in town. Is a Trans-Pacific Partnership deal going to be good for you? Well, proponents say yes. The deal could crack open barriers to New Zealand exports, add between $3.5 and $5 billion a year to our earnings from trade, and generate new jobs in the economy. Opponents say no, it will govern the way we do business and work in New Zealand, restrict our ability to adopt our own solutions to New Zealand health and environmental issues, and expose our government to massively expensive legal actions by foreign companies. But the political leaders from the 12 nations involved in negotiating this Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement are working to bring the TPP talks to a finish by the end of this year. However, no one outside the government negotiating teams knows precisely what's in the agreement text that's on the table right now, and our government is saying, in effect, trust us, we know what we're doing. Well, this week, we're bringing in two people who are close to these negotiations to argue the pros and cons of the issues that have to be addressed. They're Jane Kelsey, a specialist in international economic regulation from the Faculty of Law at Auckland University, and Stephen Jacobi, Executive Director of the New Zealand United States Council. Well, thank you both for joining us. We start off from the grounds of mutual ignorance of the precise text that's on the table at the moment. But on the basis of what you do know, the first question I'd like to put to both of you is, would this partnership arrangement be good or bad for New Zealand? You're just back from Bali. Stephen, go first.
Well, if TPP can be successfully concluded and the negotiators stick to the vision for comprehensiveness, ambition and high quality, then yes, I believe it will be very good indeed for New Zealand.
In what sense?
I think in two ways. It can transform the way business is done in the Asia-Pacific region, and that has to be good for our exporters and international businesses, and also can open up some new markets for New Zealand.
I think most of us are really
region.
interested in two things. One is economic positive growth and jobs. Is it going to deliver on those?
And growth and jobs will come from reducing the cost of doing business, opening up new markets, making it easier for companies to operate around the region.
Jane Kelsey, I take it you disagree.
There's a really important debate, I think, that's starting to happen in the country now about what the economic model for the future should be that actually genuinely generates not only jobs but good quality, secure jobs. There is nothing I've seen in this agreement, in the discussions around it, that are going to provide us with that. The only benefits that are pointed to are usually, one, market access for agriculture, which we don't have a problem with, and we have already a real severe asymmetry in our economy and our dependence on agricultural exports. And second, the development of some kinds of supply chains, which from what I've seen from Fonterra's argument, is that we move from made in New Zealand to made by New Zealand somewhere else. Now that's not a model for the future. The economic model for the future will be around innovation. It'll be around us being able to use our smarts. And if the US has its way with the intellectual property rules, it's going to tie up the possibility for us to do that in ways that the IT industry itself is saying is counterproductive for the future.
What's your reading? Will the smart sector of the New Zealand economy suffer as a result of this? Because Jane is saying essentially it'll tie us up in all sorts of knots over intellectual property issues.
Well, I think it's a fallacy to think that New Zealand companies, smart New Zealand companies, don't have an interest in a very positive, robust regime for intellectual property. They clearly do have an interest in those things. They have to be able to protect their ideas on the international marketplace. They have to be able to attract investment in those ideas.
Stephen,
I think there's one sector though. I think there's one sector though that could be negatively affected.
But protecting intellectual property is a very expensive process, and in the end, deeper pockets tend to win, don't they?
That's why we have to streamline the rules, make it easier for people to get the protection to which they're entitled to, and that's part of it. But I just want to say there is one sector that it might not work for. And I certainly agree that, for example, patenting software could be quite difficult for the innovative step that they have to go through. But other industries should be able to benefit from this agreement.
Well, given that we've got a leaked text that hasn't changed from what we understand from what the US tabled some time ago, there seems to be virtually unanimous opinion around the downsides of that text. I haven't even heard the agriculture sector coming out and saying that it could be good for us. And this is part of the problem with the secrecy. If there's going to be a deal that's going to go through the US Congress and we don't get to see it until it's signed off, and the US has been saying that high value, high quality IP rules are a must-have for it, then this deal can't be good for us.
Look, can I just come back to that question of secrecy a little later? Come back to the critical issues from our perspective that you believe need to be addressed that haven't been addressed.
Well, for me, the critical issue is this is not the model for our 21st century. So it's not which bits of it can we make better. It's won't it be great if it falls over and we can actually have a discussion about what our economic and foreign policy strategy should be?
That didn't answer the question, which
Well,
was
but
what
it
are the
is.
critical issues? Now, that's the outcome that you want to see, but it's not an expression of what the critical issues are.
Oh, well, what the critical issues are the US must-haves that haven't been agreed. And I think the fact that the must-haves are the ones that haven't been agreed shows how extreme the US demands are.
And these
their medicines, their internet, their state-owned enterprises, their environment, and they're the market access issues, not only for agriculture but for a range of other products.
Well, I don't disagree that these are must-haves for the United States or that they're actually critical issues in the negotiation. They certainly are. But everything the United States wants to achieve in this agreement will not be obtained by them because there are 12 partners in this negotiation. They are certainly the biggest, but they don't have the ability to ride roughshod over the whole negotiation.
But Congress
and there are
does.
some other aspects of the agreement that are problematic for the United States. For example, Jane mentioned pharmaceuticals. The United States has 48 jurisdictions that have purchasing agencies similar to Pharmac. They are not going to want to get rid of those, therefore they can't realistically expect that we should have to get rid of Pharmac, and we won't.
No one said that they want to get rid of Pharmac. This is one of the bits of nonsense that's being peddled out there. We both agree that the leaked texts wouldn't get rid of Pharmac. They'd white ant Pharmac. They'd give the big pharmaceutical companies more influence over them. They'd make it harder for Pharmac to get value for money, which is what the drug companies don't like. And so we need to actually be honest about what we know about the text.
What do you know?
Well, I don't see the text.
But the leaked
Jane,
text's out there.
Jane knows a lot about the text, and her friends know a lot about the text. We haven't seen the text. We've seen the leaked versions of the text. If you can believe that they are the current versions or not, is a case in point. We will see that in due course. What we need to be honest about, I think, is that there are pluses and minuses in this negotiation. It is a negotiation. Tim Grosser said there are red lines all around this negotiation we have to be careful of. We certainly do. We have to come up with something that meets New Zealand's overall national interests.
Okay,
that's how negotiation works.
Let me ask you about another point, because we have just seen in Australia one example of the kind of thing that will and can happen under international trade agreements, and that is that a major American tobacco company sued the Australian government over its tobacco packaging requirements. Well, we've got tobacco packaging requirements and more plans in the pipeline. Are we likely to see a threat in that front too, as a result of this agreement?
I mean, the tobacco companies are very litigious and they'll use everything in their toolkit. About 70% of the investment disputes are actually on natural resources, and so we've just seen one a US mining company against Canada for Quebec's moratorium on fracking. We've got a Canadian one challenging the a US one challenging the Supreme Court of Canada's decisions on medical patents. So yes, we will see that.
But could I just say to that, it's happening without having
precisely. Precisely, and that's the major point.
But that's under NAFTA, and NAFTA's investment chapter is the baby of what we'll have in the TPP.
Well,
it's the
the
US
Australian,
companies.
the company suing Australia is nothing to do with NAFTA, of course, as Jane knows, but people haven't waited for TPP for this. Of course, they're using, as Jane says, whatever means they can lay their hands on. But let me answer the question, which is no. We won't see an increase in this, and why not? Because TPP contains an exception for measures in relation to public health that will be used to defend whatever action the New Zealand government wants to take with regard to tobacco packaging.
Now,
True, yes or no?
The US refuses to have that exception applying to the investment chapter. It has not applied in any existing US FTAs. It's refusing to allow it to be in this one. And Malaysia has tabled a complete carve-out for tobacco from the whole agreement. The US is opposing that, and New Zealand won't answer. So
It
I
is
think
inconceivable that we would sign an agreement that did not have a public health exception. Not just public health, by the way, Jane, environment, Treaty of Waitangi, all of these things are already in all our other trade agreements. We shouldn't sign, how about this for you? We shouldn't sign an agreement that didn't have that public health
Can you
provision
tell
in
me?
it.
I've been flipping the coin because you clearly are going to disagree with that till cows
Well, I think
come
we agree
home.
on that.
well, no, we don't,
Let's
because
talk
you can
about
drive
the
a bus
cows.
through that exception.
Let's talk about the cows coming home. Have there been any advances made on those crucial agricultural trades, the dairy trade and others that we are concerned with, which are very important to this country? Has anything happened within that negotiating framework which will advance New Zealand's interests?
Well, has anything happened? Yes, a lot has happened because
Well, no, I qualified, which will advance our interests.
And yes, the answer is yes, a lot has happened because the 12 parties, including now Japan, have agreed that we will have a comprehensive agreement that will include agriculture along with the other sectors. Now, it remains to be seen, of course, what the detail of that is. And again, we shouldn't sign an agreement if it doesn't deliver the sort of agriculture market access that we need for our exporters and our industries. But I think that we are seeing quite a bit of progress in that, and I think that was discussed quite actively at the recent meetings in Bali.
Jane, true?
Well,
From your perspective,
what
can you
we're-
see the progress?
What we're hearing is that Japan may make some agricultural commitments. The US may make some beyond what it had wanted to for the start. But we're also hearing that the phase-in periods, I read one reasonably reliable, but who knows, report last week that the phase-in period may be 30 years for tariff reductions, weighted towards the end of the 30-year period with what we call tariff rate quotas, which is sort of will allow in this much without the tariffs, with a whole lot of safeguard mechanisms and exceptions. So it'll be claimed to be a victory, and then 30 years on we'll have been sold a pup.
We signed CER with Australia back in 1983, and there was a so-called gentleman's, it was those sorts of times in those days, gentleman's agreement on dairy products that excluded dairy products completely from the agreement. Today, of course, we have completely free trade with Australia, and the same will happen in the case
we might
with
vary,
TPP.
but in a number of other areas we don't. We are still fighting battles to get various...
Battles are fought all the time, but we have open
horticultural-
access for other matters.
Are you
And
likening Australia to Japan and the US on
No, I'm
agriculture?
simply saying that there is a dynamic effect in trade agreements that we've seen not only between Australia and New Zealand, in many other agreements that give them a life of their own once they're signed. And clearly 30 years would be far too long, but let me say this. What is really important is the direction here. And if we have to wait a number of years for this to be completely fulfilled in terms of tariff elimination, then so be it. And we're looking at, for example, in Japan, some very fundamental and profound policy changes that need to take time to be phased in.
To get what we want, we have to trade off, don't we? What are we trading off?
Well, the first thing we're trading off is, do we need to produce more dairy and have more cows on our pastures in New Zealand, given the problems that we've got? And so this notion of agricultural market access for dairy presumes we can actually cope with more domestic dairy production, or it's going to be happening offshore. And there are big trade-offs. There's unknowns of the future that we've got climate change issues to deal with, we've got transport and oil and energy issues to deal with, we've got financial crises issues to deal with. The US is refusing to budge, as far as I understand it, on safeguards around financial crises. So we have real downsides, aside from the ones people talk about Pharmac and about the tobacco industry and about the investor-state disputes on mining and so on.
Are there real potentials for this agreement to actually increase foreign investment in New Zealand and to see developments which would generate growth and jobs which pay off in New Zealand as opposed to elsewhere?
Well, I think investment and promoting further foreign investment in New Zealand by giving investors the sort of confidence they have in the investment regime in New Zealand is very important. And it's one of the ways, of course, in which we're going to grow this economy. You see, when we have this debate about TPP, and Jane brings to the table a number of important issues, Jane's really advocating a whole different model of economic management, a whole different model of running our economy. No TPP would ever satisfy Jane because it doesn't conform to the sort of way she sees the economy. I respect Jane's right to have that view, but those who believe that we have to maintain an economy that's open, outward looking to investment, to trade, see the need for an
But
arrangement
I
like
hear
TPP.
Jane actually arguing more about the need to rebalance the New Zealand, or refocus the New Zealand economy and diversify it from some of the things that we've been most concerned about in trade agreements in the past, and perhaps look for creating opportunities in areas where we can use our brains as opposed to our grass.
That's right, and that's why we need a new model for the way we do business in the Asia-Pacific region that incentivises the operation of supply chains, because this is a reality that is already with us,
Well,
that provides the right climate for innovation and all of those sorts of
When
things.
you talk supply chains, and you both talk supply chains, what on earth are you talking about from the point of view of ordinary New Zealanders saying, what's in it for me? I mean, what has this supply chain thing got to do with anything? Mostly to do with trying to get goods through borders, I would have thought, or money across borders, one or the other.
Well, and
Supply
it's, you know,
chains?
from the union's viewpoints, it's a real concern about the offshoring and the facilitation of investors and manufacturers and producers to be able to locate elsewhere and shift stuff around the region. But to go back to Stephen's point, it really upsets me when people keep saying we're anti-trade or we're anti-investment. Of course not. But if you look at our record of foreign direct investment in New Zealand, what have the benefits to New Zealand been? Virtually none of that's been greenfield investment. It's been buying up and often stripping with very few controls. And the agreements that we have signed already, and the TPP will take this further, have tied our hands in the ability to be able to put more requirements on foreign investors as to how it will benefit New Zealand. And we're going to face the same now that we've got more PPP contracts for a whole range of activities, whether it's the hospitals and the prisons or the roads and whatever, which are going to be procurement contracts that New Zealand companies aren't going to be able to bid for. It's going to be the foreign companies that are going to end up with those
What do you mean they won't be able to bid for?
Well,
You mean they won't be able to outbid for?
indeed.
Okay.
The level playing field is not going to be a playing field that benefits most New Zealand bidders in the PPP markets.
What's your response to that?
Well, as I say, Jane has a completely different conception about the way the economy should function and the role of
Do you
investment
think
in
she's
that
a
economy.
protectionist? Is that what you're saying?
Well,
She's
she
being
clearly is
protectionist
protectionist
and-
because she would rather New Zealand companies did everything if that were in fact possible. It simply
Say
is not.
everything.
But is
It's
this-
simply not possible. But but protectionist is maybe one way of looking at it. I think that Jane has just a different conception about the way the economy should operate.
But can I ask Stephen a question? If there are competing conceptions, why should a government be able, in secret, to bind us to one of those conceptions in ways that make it impossible for future governments who may be elected to follow a different model to do so?
Because, of course, the answer is that the conception that we're working on at the moment is kind of the standard conception that the economy has been running on for many years.
Keynesianism was at one stage.
It is the subject of consensus between the major political parties, not all of them
Well,
by
it's
any means,
shifting now.
but not all of them by any means. But it is the subject of major consensus, and we have a lot of knowledge and experience in the way this has worked in the past. And of course, future governments can change things.
How?
Well, of course,
They can go back and renegotiate
they can
the agreement?
go back and renegotiate
Oh,
agreement. They can
Stephen.
suspend parts of the agreement they don't like. But you know, the point of the matter is
With
that
sanctions.
the point of the matter
You don't
is
agree?
No, of course not. Even Wayne Mapp didn't agree with that the other night.
well, the point of the matter is this, that the New Zealand government has been elected to maintain this policy.
It's been elected.
And that's our constitution, Jane. And if you don't like it, try and change the constitution. Actually, yes, you are trying to do that, and good for you. But that's the way in which we order our democracy, our constitution, our sets of policies.
Those who are elected don't get to vote on this before it is signed by
No, but this is the way
cabinet.
we make treaties, Jane. You know this. We make treaties like this. This is
Why?
how we
It's
made.
not democratic.
Excuse me, why? I mean, what is it that says that we shouldn't know what the negotiating text is? And what is the benefit to New Zealand of us not knowing? I mean, arguments like this are founded on fear.
Yeah.
They're not founded on fact, because we're not told what
Well,
the
they're
facts
founded on
are.
the facts that we have.
That's right, but we don't.
and the statements
but-
that have
or the
been
fears
made.
that we have.
But both sides are very easily defeated by the argument that, well, we don't really know.
Well, show us the text and we can
Show
have
us
the
the
No,
public
text.
and we
debate.
shall show
Why
the
can't
text.
we show
Well, the
you?
government will
Why
show the
can't we
text
show us
once it is the text is in
But
fact
it's too late
completed.
to do anything about it.
Once it is completed, Look, we've negotiated treaties like this for a long period of time. This is
WTO
how we
releases
negotiated
texts.
the Kyoto Protocol.
WTO
This is how we
releases
negotiate.
texts.
This is how we negotiate
ACTA
ILO
text was
conventions.
public.
All of these sorts of things have been done in this sort of way.
No, the
This
ILO
is the way.
conventions
This is
aren't
the way we
secret.
negotiate your house purchase.
The ILO
This is the way you
conventions aren't
negotiate your
secret.
employment agreement. The reason we have to keep them confidential. These are not secret. Everybody knows this is being negotiated. Everybody knows what's being talked about.
Well,
So
It
it's not
certainly is
secret because we
confidential.
can't see it.
It is certainly confidential. And why is it confidential? There are two reasons. One is because there are very significant political and economic issues, national issues at stake here, that we need to
We
make
might say
sure
no.
that we need to leave our negotiators with the maximum flexibility to negotiate. And the second reason is that the 12 parties have agreed that they will keep the negotiations secret, that they will keep the text secret for the time being.
all right, but I mean,
But it will be
But we
revealed.
could
But
go back
how
to
many
them and
bottom
say we think
lines?
it's wrong.
How many bottom lines has the New Zealand public been consulted on? How many no-go zones have the New Zealand public had the opportunity to define in terms of our own debate? We don't have to know what's actually in the negotiating text, but we do have to know where our government stands on issues which affect us. Surely.
Well, that's
Fair point.
a point to make to Minister Grosser, of course. But the reality is the government has
Are
consulted.
you comfortable with the level of secrecy about it? Are you comfortable with the level of information which the average New Zealander has about this?
I think we
process
should
and
always be
agreement?
trying to look for other ways
Or-
to make
or-
information available about the negotiation
Like,
by, encouraging debate, by having our negotiators meet with people as they do frequently,
Oh, and they tell
by
you nothing,
speaking,
you know.
by peering, and all the rest of it. I think there's more we can do in this whole area, and that should be done. But I think releasing the text is very, very problematic because this is a negotiation, and a negotiation can't be done like that.
now, Jane,
the
you
WTO
said,
does
you
it.
said,
And
in
look what
one
happened to the
occasion-
WTO, Jane.
Yes, exactly, because people
because-
don't like it doesn't mean that you shouldn't release it.
Because it was undermined by
By
different
people
parties to the
doing
negotiation.
analysis, by people doing informed analysis of what the implications are. And if that leads you to a decision that you shouldn't sign it because it's not in your national interest, then isn't that a jolly good thing?
I think it would prevent the negotiators ever being able to bring to us a text that represented a degree of consensus amongst the negotiating parties. And it is quite right that once that is finished, it is brought to the public. There's a political process around that, there's a select committee and all of that sort of thing.
Well, you
How
can't
many,
do
how
anything.
many of these complex and secretive trade negotiations have ever been brought to conclusion on a multilateral basis?
Oh,
Can you name
yes.
what's
I mean,
been
if you-
brought to a conclusion? And
Well, Uruguay round?
the
it was
European
brought to a
Union.
conclusion. What conclusion did it reach?
Well, no, the Uruguay
what
round.
degree?
Established the
the Uruguay
WTO.
round established the WTO, put in place the very happy circumstance in which we've been trading our agricultural products to this day.
But
Really?
part of the consequence is, especially because the Uruguay round broadened from real trade into areas like intellectual property and investment rules and so on, people insisted that this was going to impact hugely on domestic regulatory and policy decisions, and so they were forced to release much more of the documentation, and that is what has been happening in the WTO, and it allows governments, including governments that don't have much resource themselves, to be able to get access to informed analysis and so on as well. It's happening consistently in the international domain. And what we're seeing is a step backwards here in the level of secrecy. In the US Congress members said this is outrageous. They were then allowed to ask to see specific parts of the text, not take a pen and paper with them, not take any advisors with them, and not tell anyone afterwards if they thought it wasn't good, why it wasn't good. And they think that this is nonsense. Now, they've got much further than any of ours have. And we need to be clear that democratically elected governments have a responsibility to look after their constituencies and to be accountable to those constituencies. And this process does not allow that.
Well, as I say, I think that there are a lot of things we could do to make the information much more transparent around these negotiations, and we should pursue those things.
Tell
But
me-
I think
tell me-
releasing the text is just a no-go area in this
All right,
context.
well, not necessarily releasing the text.
Yes,
Surely there
releasing
could
the
be, well, release the text might be fine from your perspective, but even if it was subjected to opposition scrutiny, opposition political scrutiny, in the manner in which the Congress was offered access to material. Why not? I mean, if the Americans were prepared to put that proposition to Congress, and Congress said, no, thank you very much, we think this is a bit of nonsense, at least they did it. What's happening here? I mean, is there a quiet effort going on to achieve a political consensus that we don't know about?
I'm confident that the government is in very close discussion with leaders from the opposite side about the nature of this agreement.
You're confident?
I'm confident about that.
You sound like somebody who knows what they're talking about.
Well, I always try to sound like I'm someone that knows what I'm talking about. But in this case, I think that this agreement is so critical to New Zealand's future that the government would have every interest in making sure that its political opponents, at least some of them, could be aware of the nature of these discussions.
Right.
But I don't think that goes anywhere near actually releasing the text. And that is because there was agreement amongst the 12 parties, because this is a negotiation, because it's very complicated to try to bring to fruition. And once that is done, of course, we'll have the chance to see.
Is there anything that's signed, sealed and delivered so far? I mean, I've heard that this agreement is divided into chapters, and chapters have been managed through, in fact, have been concluded in terms of discussion between the member nations. Is that correct?
I don't think anything is agreed until everything is agreed.
Okay. All right.
If you read the press, the trade press,
All right.
they say from time to time they've finalised this chapter or that chapter, but the big issues I think are still subject to square
I have
brackets.
two quick questions for you finally. How do you rate the prospects of the December deadline for the conclusion of negotiations being met? Dan?
Oh, well, it can't happen. I mean, there are 4 must-have chapters for the US that are a total mess. So it can't happen. Second, Obama doesn't have fast-track authority where the Congress has to either agree or disagree as a whole.
I was going to come to that next rather than at this point, but
Okay.
I'm talking about the negotiators themselves.
That is stuck, and too many sensitive questions. If it gets pushed, some, I think, will walk away. And it won't happen certainly by Christmas.
Stephen?
We've just had a meeting in Bali of the TPP leaders where they reaffirmed again that they would like to see this done by the end of the year. Trade ministers I've spoken to all say it can be done, but whether it will be done will depend on the nature of the negotiation. So, I'm optimistic, but I think we have to be realistic as well, that if it takes longer, then so be it. It will need to take longer.
Final quick question and a quick answer from both of you. How do you rate the chances of a TPP agreement, if it is concluded in negotiation by December, being actually accepted by the member nation governments?
Jane referred to fast track in the United States a moment ago. Of course, fast track is not required to complete the negotiation. It is required to get it ratified through the Congress.
That's what I'm talking about.
That is another process, and a longer process probably. And who could actually be completely confident about the state of the Congress at the moment. But I think there is every reason to suggest that President Obama will be able to get the sort of support he needs from his opposition to get a good deal through.
Jane?
I think the chances of it going through without a dogfight in Congress are nil. I think we see that the Tea Party, which hates these agreements, is going to not do anything that makes life easy for Obama. And any government that signed up to a deal, the Congress could pick apart, take what it likes, leave what it doesn't, is out of their mind.
Jane Kelsey, Stephen Jacobi, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And the participants in our discussion on the Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations were Jane Kelsey, a specialist in international economic regulation from the Faculty of Law at Auckland University, and Stephen Jacobi, Executive Director of the New Zealand-United States Council. Well, that's all for now. I hope you'll join us again same time next week for another Beatson interview. Till then, thanks for your company and bye for now.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.